Hey, Patricia.
Hi, Kim. How are you?
Nah. Um, we want to begin this episode with letting you all know that we scripted this before the horrific fires in LA happened. We're in Venice, weren't fine, but we've know a lot of people who aren't. We've adjusted the conversation and might touch on some of the governmental technology issues and artist response which arose from the fires. We also wanted to let you know in advance. So, for those of you who might not want to revisit this moment, you can just go ahead and skip this episode. Our hearts are broken. We are okay, and so many are not.
I'm so sorry, Kim, and our hearts go to everybody in LA, to all the communities and all the people who are suffering right now.
Yeah, I mean, when we're recording this on January 13th, it's 11 a.m. Fires are 14% contained for the Palisades fire on the west side and 33% contained for the Eaton fire on the Altadena, Pasadena area. And we're not even a week. It's up to 92 artists and art workers who have lost their homes or are impacted. So the effect to the community is deep. So it's going to be I'm a little raw today, folks, but
Mhm.
we're gonna push through.
Yeah, we're here to hear you out, to be, just a source of emotional support, and we're sending lots of healing and love your way. Me and Taras and everybody here at the UMDR Gallery, we are thinking of you guys.
Well, you haven't exactly had an easy week either.
Well, compared, it's like it's normal. We get a lot of snow every year, and we did get a big snowstorm last week. There were cancellations or closures here at the university, and but it's just snow. Watching the news and seeing everything that has happened in LA is just absolutely devastating and heart-wrenching. So
It is. And, our topic that we had scripted for today actually is kind of interesting and on point. The episode is going to be part of an ongoing topic about art and technology and how artists use technology, but it's a huge topic. For this episode, we were focusing on technology tools, software platforms that artists and curators use to develop their works, exhibitions, but now technology has transformed into a more mutual aid and the amount of spreadsheets that I've seen flying around with resources is phenomenal. So, artists are scrappy and we use tech in a lot of ways.
yeah, we wanted to talk about the practical uses of technology for artists, and also look at some of the questions and problems these time-saving and streamlining technologies raise. And I think it's also adequate to think about the other side of technology, right? Like resources, usage, and all these other questions around even how contemporary artists engage critically with this rhetoric around saving time and being efficient that has sort of shaped post-industrial societies.
So, the question that we had been batting around when we were talking about this topic before was, is technology a tool, a time saver, or a time taker?
Welcome to The Art Equation, a podcast from Now Be Here. I'm one of your hosts, Patricia Ortega, and our historian and independent curator.
I'm your other host, Kim Schoenstatt, a contemporary artist and organizer of Now Be Here, a directory of and for women and non-binary artists.
On this podcast, we have a little charla, a little bachipapo about making art and making exhibitions. We invite fellow artists, curators, archivists, and people from different areas of the art world to share their knowledge and their experience.
We are curious about what goes on in the day-to-day of arting. We want to talk shop, get in the weeds about what goes into art shows, talk with the makers and the doers of the art world. Welcome to the Art Equation.
I think we should delve into this topic right away, Kim. So I want to get us started by asking you, what do you think about technology informing how artists work?
I mean, I have to say, this is kind of a nice distraction from everything else I've been thinking about this week. So now let me put my art history hat on a little bit, just from an artist perspective, that technology has often been a tool for making art. It allows artists to take ownership of production and distribution. I mean, a prime example of this is the Sony Portapak. Artists were suddenly able to make TV. They were able to make work cheaply with their own equipment that they could easily use and actually carry. Previous to this, you needed multiple people. It was pretty expensive. You had to rent equipment. And then all of a sudden, artists like Cynthia Mon and John Baldessari were able to make work alone in their studios without a crew and then get it into the world. That's kind of revolutionary.
Yes, I absolutely love that you bring this topic to start us off because I love talking to my students about the Sony Portapak. It's sort of a protagonist in my post-war art course on the section about art in the 1960s, particularly when I'm setting up the context to introduce fluxus and Dick Higgins' concept of intermediality. The Sony Portapak marks this key moment when there is this sort of bridging of art and the broader media culture of the time, which in the 60s is inseparable from the political and social mobilization unleashed by, of course, the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Artists like Suzanne Lacy with her work in Mourning and in Rage in 1977. Of course, those words now land a little bit different, but that comes to mind. The Women's Building in LA actually had classes to teach women artists how to use video equipment. At that point, it was a pretty egalitarian tool. It hadn't been gender claimed, so to speak.
Well, yeah, actually, there was a lot of thinking about media and gender. And so the Sony Portapak, it's very much linked to the connections between home video and documentary film and feminism in the 70s. I can think of the work of people like Laura Mulvey, the British feminist film theorist who developed the concept of the male gaze, right? So her work will be unthinkable without her own experiments with a portable camera as a medium that could be turned against the traditional male creator, right? The male perspective. She created this film, Riddles of Sphinx, which is one of those canonical works of feminist cinema. I don't know if you've seen it, but yeah, it's wonderful.
Totally. My doppelganger, Kim Schoen, took me to a screening of it with a bunch of Cal Arts folks. It was fascinating. And if you haven't looked this up, I really suggest looking it up and screening this. It's a pretty bonkers film.
It is. I mean, it tells a lot about how huge the impact of this camera was in terms of theory, in terms of aesthetics. Now you have everyone with a portable everything, right? In your phone all the time. But during those days, having a portable video camera that you could take on the streets, right, where protests are happening, really where everything is happening beyond what mainstream news and television is feeding people. That was the whole idea behind Gil Scott Heron's The Revolution Won't Be Televised, right? So yeah, this camera challenged mainstream media at the time and media's biased and often misleading coverage of events, opening the possibility for this kind of more independent reporting and broadcasting at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point for the independent reporting and broadcasting, right? It's still biased. It's still presenting your personal view. And so it's an interesting problem. But you're actually making me think about so many other artists who are using the Sony Portapak and making films. Eleanor Anton, Valley Export, Martha Rossler, Judy Chicago, Joan Jonas. I mean, I could go on. It was a very freeing device.
Yeah, it is sort of a mark of the times. One of my favorites is the Video Freaks. It was a grassroots collective of young artists who were doing a lot of activist work by reporting on a lot of issues that were not being covered. They are a great example, I think, of how technology, originally promoted as having a practical use, in this case, the handheld camera that allow you to take videos anywhere you went, had some radical political implications.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that a single person could carry something around that was so immediate and
Hmm.
made the whole process faster. It was sort of like what the Polaroid did for film.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, the Polaroid was sort of advertised in this very similar way, right? Like you can just go and take your photographs, and now
And it's instant. It was
and
like
it's
there.
instant.
You didn't have to go in a dark room and develop film and, wait and mess around with chemicals. It was like just blow on it and it will go.
Yeah, I mean, with the Portapak, going into spaces or places where mainstream news media was not going. I remember the Video Freaks and their famous reporting from the Republican National Convention in 1972, when the
Hmm.
United States was still in Vietnam. But really, all of avant-garde film movements of the 60s were impacted by the possibility of taking the camera out to the streets. So yeah, technology is usually understood as having these practical advantages, but end up also having unforeseen political impact.
I mean, definitely political and practical. I mean, a tool like the Portapak or the first autofocus camera or Polaroid film, like we just said, or Photoshop, these made it easier and more affordable to work. But there's
Hmm.
also an important thing that was happening was that artists were taking their fate into their own hands. They were
Hmm.
becoming less dependent on other means, which, also makes you more nimble and have more control.
Yes. Yeah, taking control and therefore ownership of different aspects of your work really changed not only how artists made work, but how they also, like you were saying, to how the work is distributed, shared, presented, because technology provided all of these tools, I guess, for artists and creatives.
Yeah, and not just on the creative side. I mean, artists use programs to take back control, like where their work is and lives in the world. I mean, that's a big part of it. We used to rely on galleries to do things like keep track of inventory, who bought what, documenting our work, handle image requests, basically be our archives. We outsourced that to another person and we lost control.
But why was this a problem?
Um, it's a problem because if you don't know this information, it's really hard to know where your work is in the world. So when artists would leave a gallery, all of a sudden they didn't have this information and the gallery didn't give it to them. A lot of galleries, some
Mm.
galleries did, but some galleries would charge artists for their photos because the gallery spent the money on having their work documented. They
Mm.
considered that to be a cost and a cost that they would then try and charge the artist. But it's a little different for when you're documenting an exhibition, for example, and you have $100 worth of photo expenses versus when an artist would leave a gallery and then all of a sudden have $1,000 worth of photo expenses. It's not over time, it's all of a sudden, and they just couldn't afford it. So, getting back to focus here, artists didn't know where their work was and who owned their work. And then if
Mm.
a gallery closed, that was it. You're out of luck. And so artists started realizing that they needed to take responsibility for this and started taking it on.
Mm. I see. And what kinds of things did they do?
Well, they started realizing that they need to ask for the photos of their works at the time of exhibition and who purchased their works. where the collectors lived, etc. And there's a little bit of a push-pull here because sometimes the galleries don't want to give up that collector information for fear that the artist will go directly to the collector. And, then you're not working in partnership anymore. You're working against each other's interests. But,
Mm.
this does remind me that, like, when I was working for Baldessari in the 90s, he was very tech savvy. He had a tech savvy assistant, Cindy Bernard, who started him on programs like FileMaker Pro for the archives and Quicken for the books and Photoshop to help expedite his creative process. And by using programs like that, it made it easier to track the info because we knew where the works were, and it puts the control back into the artist's hands.
That's an important part of the conversation, I think. I'm just building on your wonderful point earlier about these possibilities that the practical side of technology brings, as it allows artists, and particularly women artists, to have more independence and agency over their work. I have a friend who is a DC-based artist, Michelle Herman, who I actually want to have on the show. And she exposes and challenges gender inequalities in the tech industry in particular. I mean, we know technology has been a field and an industry historically dominated by white men, not only in regards to the workforce, but creatively and ideological speaking, right? It takes more than filling offices with women to really see a change in sort of the structural part of the system, because technology at some point is a thing on itself, right? It's a form of reproducing a system of power and control that is also a product of this Western scientific thought. And some will say this new phase of its imperial project. What I'm trying to say is that technology itself is its own thing, and its way of operating also grown out of a certain structure of power.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And I just heard Mindy Sue on a panel with Nancy Baker Cahill and Sarah Rosalina, and it was moderated by Jory Finkel. It was actually part of the Getty PST initiative, which was Art and Science Collide was the topic this year. And Mindy Sue edited the Cyberfeminism Index, which I was like, wait, what? This exists? This is amazing. And
It's amazing.
I know, right? Like, I need to read the explanation because there's no way I would be this succinct, especially not right now. In Cyberfeminism Index, hackers, scholars, artists, and activists of all regions, races, and sexual orientations consider how humans might reconstruct themselves by way of technology. When learning about internet history, we are taught to focus on engineering, the military-industrial complex, and the grandfathers who created the architecture and protocol. Sound familiar? But the internet is not only a network of cable servers and computers. It's an environment that shapes and is shaped by its inhabitants and their use. So that kind of speaks to what you were just talking about.
Yeah, it does. Exactly. That's what I was thinking about, but that was beautifully put.
Right?
I want to bring back the conversation to this specific impact of technology for you as a working artist, Kim. What has changed?
I mean, the fires, of course, are fresh on my mind because they're not out yet. With these fires, it makes me think and worry because so many artists have lost so much that there are tools that we can use. There's archiving tools, for example. There's Arternal or Artwork Archive. There's ArtLogic. There's a ton of them. I'm kind of hoping that people were taking advantage of some of these programs and putting images and archives on the cloud so that that's one less thing you had to worry about when you were running out the door. I mean,
yeah, it is very helpful to know it beforehand. And I'm speaking from my own experience because I got my computer stolen in 2017 from my car who got broken into. This was in Houston. And I had all my master thesis work, and I had, all of my documents, pictures, everything from the last 10 years. One person came, told me when I told the story, oh, my stuff got stolen, told me, well, Patricia, There is this Cuban writer, and one of his best novels sort of ends with the total loss of his archive and the loss of his library and all his documents and everything. And, that made me feel a little bit better because it's like, well, we're going to lose things in life, and, losing, it's part of our human experience.
Yeah. And then you rebuild.
And then you rebuild. Yes.
Yeah. But that actually made me think about just talking back about art and technology. Like when you're planning exhibitions, are you using practical models or virtual models?
I personally prefer to work only with 3D models. We have both available, but for me, I prefer 3D models.
Like the practical
And
one, not a virtual one.
yeah, like a physical one. Yeah. I'm not tech savvy, and I do not intend to be. I do incorporate some digital tools in my teaching, but when it comes to exhibition design, I prefer the maquette than the virtual digital model that you can create with SketchUp, for example. There are many benefits that come with SketchUp. You can recreate a viewer's experience on site and have a better sense of how the audience will actually experience the works at eye level and interact with the different parts of the exhibition, the different rooms. But the process behind creating the space to me seems so time consuming rather than time saving.
It's a pretty steep learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And also it can get stolen along with your computer. Yikes.
Yeah, there you go. Yes. Well, but planning and designing exhibitions is always a form of storytelling. So I think of it more sort of conceptually and especially too, but I prefer to work with these physical 3D models because you can sort of put both of them together, the sort of conceptual aspect of it and the walking through the gallery. But here at the art gallery, we recently commissioned a group of students from the architecture department to create this maquette of our space to scale. It is the coolest thing. It has movable walls, and which our space has. So it's very convenient, and it looks like a bag. You can close it and open it and deassemble it, so you can transport it too. There is something very accessible and playful about this physical model. It forces you to have to be there in the space instead of over relying on the virtual reality that SketchUp aims to be. But Kim, you said before that you still make a foam core model for exhibitions. Why do you use both?
Well, I think that's the difference between our exhibition prep, right? You're always working with the same space. Like you are at the museum, your University of Maryland Art Museum. So that space is static for you. It's not going to move. It's not going to change. But for me, I have a show one place and then I have a show in another place. So a site visit is helpful, but it's also not the whole picture. I make both a digital and a physical model to study and understand the space. There's something like kind of funny about the busy work of making both, but it really helps me understand what's happening in this space. And that's an important part of the developing of an exhibition. So it can be a time saver in terms of communication because it also helps me share with my collaborators, the curator and, the space or the gallery, sort of here's my vision.
Yeah. Tech skills are now practical skills, right? But I don't know, I'm deeply skeptical about this whole idea of technology being a time saver. To me, it seems awfully suspicious. But there are also artists using AI technology to push against this notion of time saving and efficiency. One that I saw not too long ago in 2022 was the work of a contemporary Austrian artist, and I actually wrote a little piece about it, who was part of the exhibition Futures. This exhibition opened in November of 2021 at the Smithsonian's Arts and Industries building. This was a building that had been closed for many years, decades even. And so the piece was called Doing Nothing with AI, and it caught my attention because It's a very weird thing. It's like machine learning system slash body slash machine that interacts with you. And it's not exactly imitating human motion, but it is incorporating these movements. And by doing this, it's sort of being trained to activate the part of the brain that allows us to do nothing. Basically, disconnect from heavy mental work, right? It's sort of the place we go when we're free to do anything, like free dancing, for example, or just doing a movement without really completing any task. Specifically, these movements that are open and fluid and a bit mindless.
I mean, that's a really interesting thing. And I think it kind of pushes us to be more clear as to what we want, right? There is this idea of a prompt engineer,
Mm-hmm.
because you actually have to be fairly articulate with the AI to get the response that you need or that you're looking for. So in that way, we have to refine our ideas in order for AI to maybe do the heavy lifting.
Hmm. I mean, yes, and I also wonder, what's behind all this input that is being registered with AI and this idea of learning and this idea of intelligence. I also want to mention a more recent discovery is this book I was reading. It's titled The Cybernetic Hypothesis. And it's a manifesto-like text written by an anonymous group of, I don't know, intellectual thinkers from France. They go by Tiqqun. And so part of their thesis is centered around the very origin of the word cybernetic, which means to steer or to govern, basically piloting. And so we're talking here about society itself being in this piloting mode, or everything rather, sort of operating like a machine that integrates all the information in order to operate optimally, right? And to avoid disasters, to avoid accidents, to prevent uncertainty and any and all threats, right? Eliminate threat. So I see the connection here because then, in a way, this time saving and streamlining is this cybernetization of life that comes with its positives, of course, but it's hardly ever scrutinized in a consistent and serious way beyond conventional critical or ethical takes on the effects of technology in everyday life, or right, whether you're a
Right. Well,
naturalist or
this past week, the generated alerts that were panicking us were no help. Even the
mm-hmm.
city admitted this in the LA Times. I found the quote. It said, the alerts, quote, are not being initiated by human action, end
Oh
quote.
wow.
So
Oh
this
wow.
begs the question is what is initiating thousands of people to freak out?
Technology itself. Technology is operating on its own. Nobody is controlling or regulating anything. So, what I am very sort of shocked by is this idea of the error that you're pointing to, right? Like the glitch, how the glitch produces this panic. And I think panic is the breaking of this cybernetic self-regulated system that is sold out to us as keeping everything under control. This is not to say that I blame technology as this disembodied or abstract thing that is against humans. I'm just,
Might
right?
be.
But my point is precisely that the technological systems that currently shape our lives and our thoughts, and that are both human made and organic systems, are sort of there to prevent these disasters, right? That when they happened and when they unfold in this sort of collective panic, it's in a way a breaking down of that system, a sort of a revelation or demonstration of its flaws.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd go with that. And it also freaks me out that they're taught with all of the things that we've made, right? Which is a very destructive and violent history. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to get us back to our guiding questions. So we use tech to fill the gaps and to make our lives easier.
Yes. And more structured and organized in ways that, could end up controlling us too.
Yeah. Well, it's a really mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And now I think with LA's rebuilding efforts, we wonder how much tech artists will be using and how to walk that line. Tech is helpful in the face of danger versus tech being dangerous in its own way.
Yeah. But I think that just to sort of wrap it up, I will go back to the beginning and just say, yes, but um, if this is making obvious that we need to have a more community-based lifestyle, we need to have information accessible that it's not just either what the government tells us or what social media tells us. But, I'm just thinking about all of the things that can improve when we connect with each other and when we, are more in touch with our everyday experience.
Well, I think we now know where the gaps are. So
Yes,
now we can have
definitely.
some very honest conversations about how to fill those gaps. This does bring us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening. Our hearts go out to everybody affected by the LA fires. We know we have a strong artist community in Los Angeles, and Now Be Here is here to support those affected. You might have already received an email from us regarding the fires. If you didn't, please check your inbox, and we're here for you, and the whole community is here.
Yes, our hearts go to everyone affected. Thanks again for listening. We'd like to say some thank yous to Sky Park Tosic, our lovely producer, Taras Matlack here at the University of Maryland Art Gallery, Jonathan Furmansky for letting us use your music. Thank you so much to all of you, and to our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Stay safe. We are The Art Equation. You can find us wherever you listen every other Thursday.
Thanks for being here with us. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. So please subscribe. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it really helps us out. We love the feedback. Talk to you soon here on The Art Equation. The Art Equation is a podcast from Now Be Here with support from the University of Maryland Art Gallery. Now Be Here is a directory and resource created by and for women and non-binary artists. You can find more information at www.nowbehereart.com.